Hello, my name is Tanya Gould. I am a survivor of domestic sex trafficking, and I'm just going to take a little time to tell you my story. I was graduating from high school, and I need to tell you that at that time I had a ton of vulnerabilities. One of them was that I was a single mom in high school. So here I am trying to graduate. I was going to a college, local community college, actually on a scholarship. And so I knew that I already had some things that were statistically could say I would end up like on welfare or in the system. And I didn't want that for myself, and I didn't want that for my son. So I made sure, even though I had a teenage pregnancy and had decided to carry to term, that I still did everything possible to be able to, have a good future. So as I'm exiting high school, I feel like, I'm in a good place where I could continue my education and make a good example for my son. However, during that time, I need to let you know that other things had happened in my life. Like, for an example, I was a victim of child exploitation and photo images that are just inappropriate. So I felt very detached from the community that I was in. I had church family. I had, my peers and people that, I had relationships with. But, I began to feel very detached because of all the issues that I had gone through. And, I just felt like my life was very messy and that people were afraid of me because of all my trauma. So I tried to live very isolated as much as I could as far as my conversation or any problems or issues that I had. I knew that I was facing. I just tried to take care of them myself. So as I was exiting high school, a couple of us friends had decided we were going to go on a senior field trip on our own. And so we went to the local amusement park. I didn't have anybody to go with me as far as a date. And so my really best friend, her friend had a boyfriend who had a cousin. And so it was through that connection that I was able to have me a date for the amusement park. And it was amazing. I mean, he was about 28 years old and I was 18 at the time, which for me didn't seem like an issue because at this time I I had my own place, I had my own car. I was doing adult things already, so I felt like being with someone who was much older wasn't really a problem because kids my age didn't have the experiences that I had. And actually, when we were on the date and I was talking to him just about my situation, he understood, like he got it. I didn't have to do much explaining. Matter of fact, he asked very good questions and he took the initiative. He was a gentleman. He was very well groomed as far as his outer appearance. He could hold a conversation really well. And I had a great time, great mental stimulation for me. So the entire day at the amusement park went really well. At the end, as we were walking out, there was like this bench, and we decided to sit on the bench and just watch people walk by us, which was, for me, very romantic. And he looks at me and he begins to, ask me deeper questions about my life. And that's when I shared with him my child abuse experience. And he looked at me as I'm explaining this to him, and he looked at me, he said something that no one else had ever said to me before, and that was, "I'm sorry that happened to you." And when he said that, I just felt this connection, this validation, like all these feelings in my heart that I didn't know was there. This sense of belonging and being heard and, being understood. No one had given that to me. And I love that when I'm talking to people about my story, it's just that little piece right there that, people in my community, like nurses or, I don't know, anyone, social workers, if I had a sexual abuse experience, and, family members, church members, if anyone would have said, I'm sorry that happened to you, I don't think the way he said it would have impacted me so much. And here I'm sitting there with him and having all these emotions and not able to really articulate them all. But I felt like it was love. I feel like that's exactly what it was. This is what it means to be loved. And that's true, right? But it wasn't healthy. It was manipulative. We continued to date for 4 months. So it was the summertime where he would come and he would pick me up and we would go shopping. He would do things that were really spontaneous. And he did a great job with building trust with me and my son. He was very nice to my son. There was nothing looking back on that situation that would have led me to say or spot that he was a trafficker. He was just fun, very generous, and always took the initiative with things. And so, matter of fact, friends of mine would come to me and they would say how happy and proud they were of me because, I was in this relationship and how happy I had seemed to be. And the other thing was I was hardly ever home. He would come and pick me up and we'd go travel or do something adventurous. So, to people, it would seem like, or it was just seem very normal in a relationship that's just starting out. And I had no complaints. I can't look back on that moment and say that he ever made me feel uncomfortable. He was very kind and listened to me really well. Well, September is coming up and I am about to go to school for an early childhood education degree. I was super excited about it. And just maybe a couple days before school started, he had given me a call and said that he wanted to talk to me about our future, which I was super excited about. And so while we were having the conversation, he mentioned that he and I have been having talks over the months about owning property and doing some really big things. And he said that with me having a degree in early childhood education and him working at the post office is what he told me he was doing, that, we wouldn't make enough money to do some of the things that we said we wanted to do. And so he said he had an idea. He wanted to run it by me. So he said to me, I'm going to say a word to you, and I want you to tell me the very first thing that comes to your mind. So he says the word madam. And so I'm thinking the word madam, like I say, I don't know, 1820s and stagecoaches was, the first thing that had come to my mind. He said, nope, madam, try again. And I said, okay, madam, it's when an older woman takes care of a younger woman and the younger woman sells sex and she gives the money to the older woman. The woman promises to protect her. Like I go into what I have heard or understood what a madam to be. And he said, correct. My mom is a madam and she's giving me the business. Well, this was new information to me, but at that point I wasn't going to be like really show how surprised I was because I wanted to like put up this idea that I'm an adult too and I can handle adult situations or conversations. So I go ahead and let him continue to explain himself. And I remember him saying things like, I wouldn't have to recruit girls. He already had all the girls that he needs, and it's a working operation. And, I'm lost. I don't even know what kind of questions to ask, but he's saying to me, he said to me, I have been watching you over these last 4 months, and I noticed that you're very responsible. You take care of your son, and you're very good at paying your bills, and all of these accolades that were just amazing. And so I'm listening to him, and he goes, and I'm looking for a queen. So I'm giving a soft yes, like I'm understanding, what he's asking me to do. At that point, it was just being his business partner. And so after he's talking and he's hearing my soft yes, he says, now I do want you to understand that I would need you to go out there sometimes. And I remember, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I wouldn't do that. And so I said to him, no, I can't do that. And he asked me, he says, well, why not? I said, well, because I'm not a hoe. And I say that very frankly and as openly as I do because there's a lesson to learn here. And that is, we all have thoughts that we think, when we see things happening, or, we go ahead and we judge, and we, put people in a box and label them. And I did this too. I'm saying I'm not this type of person who would be caught up in this type of situation. And so he says to me, right after I say that, he says, you're not a hoe, huh? Okay. He said, well, how many people have you had sex with? And then he asked me, about STDs. I had an STD when I found out I was pregnant, actually. And he's like asking me these series of questions, like, what about your baby's father? Like, where is he? What is he doing for you? And he's asking these questions, and I'm not answering because, of course, he already knows the answer. I had given him the answer the very first day we met. And so I'm just listening, and he looks at me. He says to me, so who's the real hoe? Because my girls, they get paid for what they do. What do you have? And when he said that to me, here's the love of my life, right? Telling me that I am the very person I had judged. Like, I'm having these judgments about what a hoe is and who would actually do this. And here he's telling me, in all your efforts of trying not to be one, you actually are one. And I want to pause for a moment and just say that traffickers are master manipulators. This is their job, and this is what they do, and they do it well. And I just remember at that moment that all the emotions, all the things that I was hiding or that was suppressed, they just all began to come up. And I'm feeling bad that I had judged, and I judged others, and I'm actually the one who was being this person that I was judging, and I had these terrible feelings. And he took that moment and he said, you know what? I'm going to leave you with that, and I'll call you back. And after that phone call, I tried to call him. I was desperate to hear his voice. I started school, but I was depressed. I am a very outgoing and talkative person. I wasn't any of those things. I just couldn't wait to hear his voice again. He called me about 2 weeks later, and he said to me, just very matter of factly, like, he says, so have you made your decision? And I said, I'll do it. And right after that, he switches on me. And it's the first time I can ever remember anything, weird happening or something that may seem off. He went from being very matter of fact to, I knew you would do it. That's my girl. I knew you were the one. I'm coming to get you. I'm coming. That daddy's coming there now. And for me, that's just what I wanted. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be valued. I didn't know what the future looked like, but as long as I was with him, I was okay. Because being with him was better than anything that, in my mind, I had had. My trafficking experience lasted for about 18 months. When I think about the type of buyers I had, all were men, and the buyers were from different backgrounds, meaning you can tell that some were professionals, some were, when we think about, taxi cab drivers or bus drivers or just your regular folks in the community. A lot of them were married men, college students, and unfortunately, which I think is really important to mention, some were definitely military men. And for me, we want military and law enforcement to be the ones that are protecting us and are making sure that they are, helping people abide by the law. Unfortunately, I was trafficked in the DMV area, which has a high presence of military personnel, and so some of them were my buyers. It also reminds me to just some people that I still work with, or survivors that I still work with that have been trafficked, have told me some of their stories. So my favorite part of my story is the part where I had an opportunity to leave that life, and it was afforded to me by a law enforcement officer. So after quite some time, I had gotten myself in a space where I realized that I was no longer just doing this to keep this relationship that I had with my trafficker. There was no going back to what it was like 4 months earlier. I had this realization that I needed to find a way out. And so I like to remind people as they are thinking of, rescuing survivors or rescuing those who are being trafficked, is that, timing is everything. Because, before I wasn't ready, right? I knew that the situation wasn't something I really wanted to be in, but there were too many barriers and uncertainties, vulnerabilities that I still was not aware of in my life, that I just didn't see where coming out would benefit me, because what did I have to go back to that was promising, or that was empowering? And so at this point in my life, when I was out with him, I realized that, as the threats were no longer threats, they were actually follow through with, beatings and, different types of punishments for not meeting a quota. I just truly understood that it was time for me to go, and I just didn't know how to do that. So anyway, I had this particular night where things were going really south, and I had lost money. I had money stolen from me. Like, it was just this really bad weekend. And, we all had gotten in trouble for it, but it was my fault. And so our punishment was that he wouldn't facilitate the time and places, like locations for us to meet with the buyers. We had to figure that out ourselves. And so that is much more difficult. So, but anyway, and it takes more time. And so there are many challenges that the three of us, was three girls this particular night, were facing as we were setting up for this evening to make our quota. And so what we did, we were in DC at the time, and we had this system set up where one person would get into a car, and then the girl behind would call out the license plate number, and then that way the driver of the car of the girl that was getting in would hear that someone is looking out. And so that's what we did, you know. And so the other thing is, no one would get into a car unless someone had come back. So we had the system, it was working, and the girl who was the queen, she actually had gotten to a car, it pulled over for her. I read out the license plate number, and then it, you know, and then it was, you know, her turn to go. So anyway, a car came right behind hers to get me, and I went to lean over to tell the driver that I wasn't going to get into the car. And she turns and looks at me and points at her wrist, you know, as to say, we don't have time. You're going to have to go in that car, even though there's no one to call out that license plate number. And so being frustrated at that, I knew I had to listen to her. So I got into the car. And I noticed right away that this driver was off. So I'm telling him where to go in order to perform our sex act. And he's not listening to me. He's just driving straight ahead. And he's not acknowledging me. He's not nodding his head or anything like that. So I get a little nervous, and I begin to say things to him like, you know, my pimp, aka trafficker, he saw me get into the car. He's probably following us since you didn't turn. You need to make this next turn. But still, he didn't acknowledge me. He didn't, you know, respond or anything. He just kept driving. So I knew that eventually, you know, in some way he would make a stop. I also noticed that on my right, there was no doorknob. You know, the doors were locked, as you didn't see the doorknob anymore. So I knew that something was wrong, and I really became very fearful of my life. So I knew when he would come to a stop, I would make my way out. We're continuing to drive. I don't know where I am, but he pulls into this area. It's like an empty car lot or something with this chain linked fence around it, and is under a bridge. He pulls into this pothole filled car lot with all this gravel, and he stops the car, turns off the light, turns the car off, and he looks over to me and says, "Give me your money." So I'm like, I'm not giving you my money. You know, this is the reason why we are out here. You know, in my mind, I'm thinking, I cannot go back to my trafficker empty-handed. That's ludicrous. I can't do that. And so I remember in my mind, I'm like, we can fight all day. I will give my life for this. I cannot go to my trafficker empty-handed. And so he comes over with a knife in his hand on top of me from the driver's seat, and we're starting to like battle, and I'm giving it my all. But you know, as I'm struggling, everything kind of goes into this slow motion, because I realize he's getting heavier to me, like his strength is gaining and mine is lessening. And I remember right at that moment, I hear a voice that's kind of amplified because the window is up on my right. And I remember the voice, there's an audible voice that kind of like hit me on my right side, and it said, "What are you doing? You have a son." And it was like, I literally forgot who I was, but that voice reminded me that I'm a mom. And if I would have died that night, you know, my trafficker would have been the only person that knew where my son was, my little one, you know, because we have night care for kids. And so, you know, at that thought, like the mama bear in me that I didn't even know was there, you know, rose up, and I said, okay, you can have the money. And I threw him the money. He leaned over, opened up the car door, pushed me out of the car, and drove off. And in anger, I read out the license plate number because no one did that for me. And then I'm on the ground crying, on my knees, just crying and screaming and angry at God because, God had helped me escape so many things. Like, there are many other times where my life was in danger when I was out in this situation of being trafficked. And I called on God. And there were times that I needed to meet a certain quota. And I would pray and it would happen. That's just the truth. I felt like this time God had failed me because I needed to go back to my trafficker with my quota in hand. So at that thought, I'm screaming, I'm angry with God, and I'm down on my knees. And then I realize that, I just have to get up and I don't know where I am. I have to find where I am. And I stand up and I realize also that I don't have any money. I don't have an ID. All I have on is my dress and my hooker shoes. That's it. So I, feel that sense of hopelessness or helplessness. And I raise my hands in the air and in like such a humbling manner, I scream out God's name for help. And when I did that, a law enforcement officer in his car heard me and put on the siren. And when he put on the siren, he, came over to where I was, and I'm walking over towards his car, because I'm thinking, oh great, now I'm gonna get locked up. Just this night just keeps getting better. And he rolls down his window and he says, "What are you doing?" And I look and I go, "What?" Because he kind of says it in a way that he knows me, and I'm kind of shocked at this. And he does his hand for me to come closer, and he says, "What are you doing out here?" And I just remember feeling like he knew me, and but understanding he didn't know me, but he just saw me as a person. He didn't see me, as a prostitute or a hooker. He didn't see me as that. He saw me as a person who needed help. And I just started crying like a baby. I knew that, that I had been heard, and I felt valued in that moment, because he saw me as a person. And so I told him everything, told him what was going on, and he paid for me to go back home. I'm from New Jersey, and he paid for my ticket. I went and got my son on the bus, and then I got back on the bus and went home. And I always say, make sure you have keep one of those crazy friends in your pocket, in your back pocket. I had a friend who's actually, she's since passed, but I knew, who can I call? Because no one knew what I was doing. And I had some very close friends. But I remember thinking, who can I call to tell them to come get me and my son looking the way that I look? And this one person came to mind, and she picked me up, no questions asked. We just talked later on, a couple days later. And that's when I began my journey to get back on my feet and to be the mom and the person that has value, who is this person who is now empowered to help others. I will never forget where I've been and where I've come from. I've come from a mighty long ways, as many would say. And so I intend to keep moving forward, to continue to heal, and to continue to show others the way. I currently work with children and adults who have been identified as being trafficked or at high risk for being trafficked. And I get to sit and listen to their stories, and not just listen to their stories, but try to really help them get the resources and services that they need to help them get their lives back on track. I'm just when it comes to, military personnel being involved in this, I think of two girls. One in particular, she was identified through an emergency room a staff emergency room had called me and said that she thought she had someone who was trafficking her, but she was taken to the emergency room for some major complications she was having. And when I went to go visit her, come to find out, her trafficker was her husband, who was military personnel. And he would take her wherever he was deployed and make her available to people, whether they be within the military or outside the military, to exploit her. And they had been doing this for about 2 years before this came to my attention. I will say, after much encouragement and just kind of sticking with her throughout her travels, she would call me from different phones at every time, just to let me know that she was doing okay. And I would just always encourage her to leave her trafficker and to report it. She eventually did. And we ended up having to report it to military personnel because, there was just some difficulty and challenges with reporting the incident to law enforcement versus military personnel. But she finally did report it to military personnel. She was able to get out and go back with her family. I also had interactions with another young lady who was trafficked by someone who was in the military, and it happened early in her life. This was her boyfriend. He's the one that put her on to this way of living. So when I met her, she wasn't with him anymore, but that is how she got started. Was with her boyfriend who was in the military, and they were just trying to make ends meet, was her story. But she ended up, using drugs to help her cope with trafficking. And by the time I met her, she was really dealing with drug abuse, drug addiction, really bad, and was able to get services that she needed. But she ended up having lots of mental health issues because of her situation. And so I think it's important that when we're thinking of trafficking and we're talking about eradicating trafficking, we have to come to grips with how this is happening, who's doing it, so we can become more proactive in the work and be smart about it. I think it's important to think like traffickers, to understand how they can find these vulnerable people and exploit them. And because it's a money-making business, it's important to remember that anybody who wants to make money, and if that's their world, like anybody is susceptible to selling something or selling a service or doing something illegal, right? So I know it's hard to think about our military personnel, right, doing something like this, but until we start having those conversations, then it'll continue to happen. And so it's our job as a community to make sure we protect the most vulnerable among us. And I think it's important that, for people in the military and law enforcement or those who have that type of authority to hold each other accountable. So when it comes to porn, I think, military personnel should be educated about what responses porn can have on a person. So when it comes to buying sex, here in the United States or in another country, I think it's important that military personnel, maybe this is something that they have done in the past and was used to doing, or it's just something that someone does. It's important to point it out and understand that this act of exploitation hurts people. and it traumatizes people. And just because you may think as a military personnel that you're just paying for sex, and you may see yourself as the nice person, not everyone is kind, and even that act in itself to the person who's being exploited, no matter how nice you think you are as a military personnel, it doesn't feel nice to us as survivors in that moment. It doesn't. It's just like anything else that's harmful. It's something that we get used to, but it's never nice. I don't care how nice you think you are, or you're being, or how much more you're paying, or how cordial you're being. It still doesn't take away or make us feel better about what's happening. So I think that's an important message to put out there